Hello, my name is Molly Cooper, and in this vlog I will be reflecting on my whole process of creating a professional standard showreel. From sourcing material relating to my casting type to the final performance in front of the camera, referencing my professionalism when working with other actors and crew on set. This will include discussing creative and professional demands and how I tackled those appropriately. In preparation for our showreel, we had discussions about our casting type as a group with help from our tutors, Niall and James, to give us an insight into what we should be looking for to portray us in the best possible light. Discovering that my particular casting age is from 16 to 25, with an edgier and more contemporary look, referencing the likes of Waterloo Road. My initial point of reference for this casting type was the character Zoe from Cuckoo, but I struggled to find a scene or a collection of scenes that she was in long enough to create a 2 to 3 minute showreel. I did take this reference to Niall, who was our director, who said that this was the right creative choice for me, and to keep looking for other characters elsewhere that would provide more substantial material. Eventually, I came across a script for the first episode of Some Girls, a comedy series surrounding the stories of young people and their relationships to one another. The scene focused on the characters Amber and Brandon, two secondary school students who attempt to navigate their way through an unsuccessful breakup, featuring plenty of comedic beats and intricate subtext for us to find, providing me a pleasant challenge to face. I felt as though a fitting scene partner would be my colleague Jack, who had been given a similar casting type of a ruffian contemporary character, also with a younger playing age. I read through this option with him, which he enjoyed, so we set that aside as a possible option. We anticipate that this scene will be an appropriate representation of our casting types, and having worked with Jack a lot in the past, we've developed a really good relationship with one another. And hopefully this will come through on camera. The aim is to demonstrate our acting chops in the best light, but equally as importantly, how well we can work with other actors. And we have a similar way of working that will benefit us when tackling this text, helping us to find the more subtleties of the scene. Niall expressed his approval of the script, visualising where the scene could go and what it could look like, and thought that the pairing was a great choice to demonstrate the casting types that we had discussed to its fullest potential. Another colleague at this time had suggested a scene from Ladhood that I had taken as a backup option, but because it featured similar comedic beats to the Some Girls scene, it was suggested that I look for something with a different tone, maximising the range of acting that I can achieve and having some versatility in the showreel itself. Niall suggested that I looked into a scene from Afterlife, particularly between the characters Tony and Anne, which would allow for a sweeter and more emotionally driven scene that could be moulded into any scenario and age group. I found a potential scene titled The Frog and the Scorpion, but we found that despite the scene having a different tone to the first, it was too heavy leaning in Anne's favour. Niall then suggested a different scene from 500 Days of Summer, of which a different pairing had previously taken to him, which was an appropriate scene for a showreel, but just not for their pairing, and suggested I ran this scene with Jack again to highlight different areas of our casting type. The scene we had was between Tom and Summer several years after they had broken up, reuniting for the first time since then and providing a bittersweet ending for the story of the two. This was an entirely different mood to our first scene and allowed us to showcase more mature characters, acting more authentically ourselves and really highlighting our chemistry. Beginning with Some Girls, it was easy enough to find the character of Amber and begin to understand her. I related her to some of the girls that I went to school with, stealing from their mannerisms and their way of talking. We found that Jack and I could exaggerate our native Yorkshire accents for the characters, not necessarily playing them dumb, but playing their naivety in understanding a relationship at 15 years old. We drew from the idea that 15-year-olds are so adamant that they understand the complexity of being in a relationship at 15, despite the straw that breaks the camel's back in this scene being that Brandon thinks that JLS are all brain dead. But then again, this is the size of their worlds at this point in life. I wanted to prioritise finding the character so that I could jump into the character quickly before rehearsals and shoots due to our limited time restrictions. This is a piece of feedback that I have received previously, that I found characters too late into the process. So for this I wanted to make sure I had a good understanding of Amber before moulding her around direction and scenarios. Our first point of direction was to play the scene completely straight. The characters fully believe this situation and is completely real to them. So heightening the comedic aspects and not experiencing this as real would be a detriment to the scene. This draws from our clowning sessions in our movement lessons, and how we as characters must fully believe what is happening authentically for it to be funny, as opposed to actually just trying to be funny. The scene had so many hilarious lines, such as "fancy giving me a quick hand job in the Wendy house," that needed to be treated as a conversation that was just normal. So in rehearsals, Jack and I explored playing the scene as straight as possible, recording each attempt and finding that by allowing the words to carry the weight of the comedy, the lines that were already written for us were both simultaneously being respected and making the scene funny. Niall worked a lot with me on allowing myself to feel the tear in both being prepared to break up with Brandon, but really empathizing with him when he gets emotional to the point of actually taking him back. He described it as being my kryptonite, and by showing the internal struggle of jumping between telling my friends that I didn't actually break up with him and coming into the conversation that I was so certain I was going to, it will elevate the character even more and add another layer to her, that being that she's empathetic. This would also put into practice my work on letting the camera in on the character's inner world and help audiences understand her and possibly even relate to her. When working on 500 Days of Summer, Niall suggested that this could be a potential opportunity for us to showcase ourselves as authentically as possible, rather than to focus too heavily on character building. Because the scene called for a lot of internal thought processes, my main point of focus was to really envision the environment that was provided to me through the text. When describing meeting my now husband at a deli reading Dorian Gray, Niall suggested to me that I use the Stanislavski method of emotion memory, considering a situation I was in or a person who I could envision, and almost borrow from that experience and revisit that feeling. This would help convey a sense of naturalism to the camera, as well as providing me an opportunity to practice this method of acting that is sometimes considered quite controversial in a very safe and comfortable scene that wouldn't cause me any emotional upset. Because this was an acting method that I was new to, I didn't grip it to its fullest extent initially. Niall did have to keep pushing me to go further into really seeing the person I was imagining there in front of me. It wasn't that I couldn't imagine them, it was more so that I needed to do it to an extent that would be picked up by the camera, as the camera picks up the internal processes and it needs to be clear and believable. It took me a little longer to get there, but after a couple of sessions with Niall and working on it independently with Jack, I finally got it. Now it's just a matter of maintaining the clarity and the authenticity of the thought so that I can revisit it in depth on the day of the shoot. I found that by using this technique, I could have a deeper personal relationship with Jack's character, Tom. I found that there was a lot more admiration that I felt towards him in this moment and found pleasure in reconnecting with an old friend. The most heartbreaking line of the scene, being "it just wasn't me you were right about," needed to be where the change of tone is. Not only to drive the emotion of the ending of the scene, but also to assist my partner in reaching a suitable emotional reaction. Because of this, it gave me a reason to deliver my next line, "I should go," and putting an end to the conversation, as I realised that I had in fact hurt Tom and needed to put an end to this chapter of our lives. Our first shoot was for Some Girls, which was filmed outside on location in our college campus. The shoot deemed to be more difficult than was anticipated, as due to the location of college, there was a lot of background noise and disruption, requiring a last-minute relocation to the car park and a delayed start to filming. Similarly, there were a few crosswires in communication between the director and ourselves and the tech crew and ourselves, which threw us for a loop for where we needed to be for the beginning of the shoot. However, I took the initiative to listen to the director's word and then explain and apologise to the tech crew what had happened. It was certainly a moment of practising the professionalism that we had been working on, as well as being resilient to last-minute changes and disturbances, both in communication and when performing the scene. It was important that we didn't let the situation impact our delivery of the scene, and that we could leave what had happened behind, starting afresh, and focusing on the work that we had done. Jack and I had a couple of run-throughs of lines and reminders of intention as the crew was setting up, so that we were in the right mindset of the scene, so that we could trust that we could put all the work we had done behind us and deliver the scene with authenticity and naturalism. Being in the environment on location allowed Niall to see the characters in the world of the scene, so he offered further direction and developments that would make the world of the scene more believable. It was important that I wasn't so certain on how I was going to deliver the scene each time and could be adaptable to last-minute direction, but also bearing in mind continuity of the scene whilst keeping each take fresh and new. I also accepted and welcomed further direction from the head of the tech crew, Ellen, to ease collaborative efforts and be malleable and adaptable to their expectations, whilst maintaining the standard of work that I had done too. When shooting 500 Days of Summer, our facilities were limited and had to shoot in our studio. But to counteract this and make the scene the best that we possibly could, my peers on the course were invited to participate as extras to create the environment of a busy coffee shop. This meant that we had an environment around us that we could respond to, making this conversation in the scene that was about something so important more private, allowing me to focus more intently on Jack in the scene. I also found that I responded to one of the extras, Coral, who was playing a waitress in the scene. At the start of the scene, I was almost in my own world, thinking specifically about how pleasant this experience is of reconnecting with an old acquaintance, but also recognising the awkwardness of not knowing what to say. As she walked past, it took me out of this inner and put me back in the moment with Jack, making me want to enjoy the conversation we were having more, which worked great with the humour and the admiration that I had found in the beginning of the scene. Before both shoots, I practiced Chekhov's imaginary body, learned from our acting technique lessons in the previous year, that allowed me to scan my body and analyse how my character would breathe, where the physical centre was, and then step into the character at the beginning of the scene. This helped me put myself mentally and physically into the world before the camera started rolling and kept each take fresh and authentic. And being fully prepared each time to work with the filming restrictions meant that we could work as quickly as possible. Whilst we work around the facilities for both shoots available to us that would not be reflective of a proper industry filming, I delivered each take and represented myself in a way that would be expected of me at industry standard, which now makes me feel confident that I can approach location shooting and working with extras in a professional and successful manner. After watching my final edited showreel back, I will reflect on my acting technique for the final product, in reference to the industrial purpose of the showreel, suggesting improvements and recognising my progress. Upon watching back the Some Girls scene, I noticed an immediate disconnect, and I think that that is potentially because of said disruptions that I mentioned prior. I now recognise how easy it is for the camera to pick up when you're not fully connected, and perhaps I didn't close the door on what happened before we started shooting hard enough, and that came through. In future, it might be best if myself and my scene partner ran over some Meisner that we had been working on in previous lessons for acting for camera. Then perhaps we could find a new way of delivering it or get us back into the emotional connection of the scene before we go into it. Frustrations are going to happen at any point on set and you cannot tell when or where they're going to happen. But now I've had the experience of that, I know how to tackle it and what it would look like if I didn't tackle it appropriately. When the phone dings, I don't feel as though my response to it was fresh or authentic, like I had this sort of planned in mind in the take that has been used. I don't know which take this was, whether it was one of the first or one of the later ones. However, that shouldn't be an issue, and each time it should still feel fresh and new, so whatever scene or clip that they decide to use, it looks authentic every time. One of the major issues for continuity was my hair. Because we were shooting outside and the wind was blowing directly into us, it was moving my bangs around so much, and a lot of that is noticeable in between takes. Because of the fact that we had to do our own hair and makeup, it wasn't something I had considered, but now I certainly know that is something that I will need to mention or talk about or fix myself in between takes if I were to have my hair like that for a future take outdoors. I feel like a lot of the comedic value that we'd worked so hard to focus on, specifically not playing the comedy but instead seeing this as a very real situation, was lost in the final take. I don't know whether that's because of the pacing of the editing or it's because I wasn't so connected in the moment. The scene wasn't actually as funny as anticipated, but what I'll need to do is make sure that in every opportunity I can to be fully connected to that world, putting all of the work that we had done to good use. With that being said though, I did feel in character when I came into the scenes, and that is seen through mostly my gesture, facial expression and my vocal work that I had been doing for the character. This did help uplift the scene, but I don't think it did it enough justice. Immediately after watching the 500 Days of Summer clip back, I feel as though I was much more connected in this scene in comparison to the Some Girls one. I have the chance to really utilise the power of the camera and the donut technique that we had learnt about to share with the camera my exploration of my internal world, especially when delivering the lines about being in the cafe and seeing my now husband, and really in visualising that moment in that situation. I'm really thankful that the hard work that I'd used to connect myself so deep into that world came across in the final scene. By connecting myself emotionally with a real world experience that I've had to the script itself really helped me achieve that. I am, however, disappointed in the overall turnout of the final scene. It feels as though a lot of the hard work that I've done in my acting is overshadowed by the production. For instance, the camera angles and the audio in the background just being far too loud. Let me play you a brief recording of said showreel so that you can hear the audio quality and how muddy it is and that it distracts from the actual performance.
I should have listened to you.
No.
Yes. Why are you smiling?
Oh.
What?
However, this is not an industry standard shoot and instead is just our practice and preparation for when we get out there into the real world. Having watched this back, I was certainly feeling least confident about my acting for camera skills, but I'm very impressed by my overall performance for the 500 Days of Summer shoot. I feel very connected to Jack, like I am sharing a very personal story with him, and we are really bouncing off each other, and the chemistry that I'd mentioned earlier in this vlog really comes across here. This was an entirely new experience of acting for camera that might possibly be the very first time a casting director or an agent will see me. I feel very confident that I know what my casting type is now, due to lengthy discussions with these professionals, and also how to act appropriately on set and with crew. On an acting level, I believe that my character choices and scenarios highlight my acting abilities in the best possible way, and that I have made the right choices to demonstrate my casting type at the highest possible standard at this point.